how to explain the sick admiration of the Biden administration and indeed the Democrats and the left for China. The Chinese regime is the most totalitarian in the world. It stretches over 1 billion people. It uses technology to control its entire population. It's got means and tools like facial recognition software and so on, things that poor Stalin or the old Soviet despots couldn't even dream about. So this is a horrific regime that imposes a conformity, a forced conformity on its population, violates human rights, goes after minorities. And yet, interestingly enough, the Biden administration appears to be trying constantly to praise, cozy up to, minimize the horrors of China. Here's a little clip of Biden talking about China. It's actually quite revealing. Listen.
And the thing that I admire about dealing with Xi is he understands. He makes no pretense about not understanding what I'm saying any more than I do him. I pointed out to him, no leader can be sustained in his position or her position unless they represent the values of the country. And I said, Mr. President, as I've told you before, Americans value the notion of freedom. America values human rights. We don't always live up to our expectations, but there's a value system. We are founded on that principle. And as long as you and your country continues to so blatantly violate human rights, we are going to continue in an unrelenting way to call to the attention of the world and make it clear what's happening. And he understood that.
It's very hard for me to even listen to this tripe. It's basically weakness masquerading as strength. And to see this, you've got to understand the sort of relativist premises of Biden's statement. His statement is not, there are universal human rights. There is a way to treat human beings, and you, the Chinese, are violating them. No, that's not his argument. Here's his argument. His argument is essentially couched as, we Americans don't really like that kind of thing. That's because we've got a long culture stretching back a long time that basically says that beating up on other people, oppressing minorities, forced conformity, are not exactly our cup of tea. Now, they may be your cup of tea, but don't be too offended if we have to sort of speak up from our point of view, recognizing, of course, that you have your point of view. I mean, this is worse than Neville Chamberlain. Imagine Neville Chamberlain in his infamous meeting with Hitler, Herr Hitler, we in England, we prefer our own traditions and our own practices. We like tea. You may not like tea. And of course, we don't like invading Poland and Czechoslovakia, and we don't like your ideas of taking over the world. We realize that those may be German ideas, but we want you to know that they're not English. Now, think of the pathetic, weak, and this is Bidenism. This is Bidenism when facing the world's most dangerous adversary. And the Chinese are actually ruthless about building up their military. They know what they're trying to do. Now, why is Biden doing this? And Biden, by the way, is not alone. Every time I see the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman talking about China, he's like gushing with admiration. Oh, the Chinese have this new amazing train. Oh, wait till you see what the Chinese are building here and doing there. And it's not just that he has this kind of grudging respect for the Chinese. Hey, these are our adversaries. They're very tough. We better. But no, his is more like, ga, ga, ga. Wow, we should be more like China. Now, this we should be more like China thing is not something the Democrats are actually doing. The Chinese actually do a couple of things with single-minded resoluteness and effectiveness, and we could learn from them. For example, they have a rigorous education system. Well, we're not doing that in our country. That's why Chinese kids in the 10th grade are basically the equivalent of American kids who have had 4 years of college. The Chinese are like 4 years cognitively ahead of Americans in math. And we're trying to debate, is mathematics unfair to Latinos? Is our equations racist? This is what our professors are doing. And similarly with the military, the Chinese are building up. They have a strategic plan. They want to control the trade routes. They know what they want to do to encircle Taiwan. They have their goals. Meanwhile, what are we doing? Well, here's what we're doing. This is from the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd. Trans rights are human rights, and on this Trans Day of Visibility, I'm pleased to announce we've updated DoD policy on the open service of transgender individuals. So can you imagine? That while they think of what the Chinese think about this? We are taking recruits and making the boys wear red high heels and walk for a mile, and this is what we're obsessed about. Which, gay platoons, men serving as women, women serving as men. We're concerned about diversity, and they're concerned about military objectives and effectiveness. What a disturbing contrast. Now, when it comes to Biden himself, there might be some people who think, well, the reason he likes China is because he's been paid off by China. He's bought and paid for by China. And that is certainly part of the truth. The Chinese have done a lot to enrich the Biden family, and we know from other documents that money has found its way to old Joe. So when old Joe puts on his doddering routine, there's a lot of suitcases of cash behind that. So that's part of the picture. But I don't think it's the whole part of the picture, because while that might explain Biden, it wouldn't explain, say, Obama's admiration for China. Obama once said very tellingly, he goes, I kind of admire the Chinese. I kind of admire the Chinese government. You know why? Because they don't have checks and balances. Basically, they just tell people what to do and make them do them. So Obama had what I want to call totalitarian envy. He didn't like the fact that he's in a democratic system with a lot of block and tackle and the filibuster. He likes the idea of basically being a despot. And I want to argue that there's something about the Democrats that appreciates this kind of despotism. Why? Because they'd like to see more of it here. They'd love to have a regime where they can just dictate orders and make Americans follow them. So this totalitarian envy is part of the reason why Democrats are a little soft on China. By the way, they were kind of soft on the Soviet Union in the 1980s. We forget that. We think, there was a bipartisan alliance against nonsense. Many years ago at the Heritage Foundation, I did a debate. It was against Chris Matthews. Chris Matthews, now of MSNBC. We were debating, is Democratic policy pro-Soviet? And my argument was kind of simple. It's not a matter of opinion. I said, let's just look at the Democratic Party's policy on a range of issues. Let's take the MX missile. The Soviets are against it. The Democrats, they're also against it. Let's take the B-1 bomber. The Soviets are against it. The Democrats are also against it. Let's go on strategic missile defenses. Reagan wants to build it. The Soviets say no. The Democrats say no. Reagan wants to fund a resistance against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The Soviets say no. The Democrats say no. So if you literally made a kind of clinical comparison, a mathematical, two Cartesian circles, you will see that the Democratic position and the Soviet position overlap about 80% of the time. And that was the basis for my argument that objectively, the Democrats are taking a pro-Soviet stance. And similarly, you could do the same thing with China now and show that by and large, in case after case, the Democrats are objectively pro-China. And the sickening thing is they're willing to sell out America to do it. They're willing to sell out American interests. They're willing to sell out American workers. So all of this is couched in the language of globalization and technology and entering the 21st century. But at the base, we're kowtowing to totalitarianism. And part of the reason is that there's a little bit in the leftist, in the Democrat, in the Biden people that secretly admires what those people are doing.